So Noah asked me to speak about operationalization. It's the first time I've given a talk about a topic that has 8 syllables. But I'll try to do my best. Fortunately, Noah has mentioned some about what he means by this and how it's generally used to be the formalization of particular theories in the humanities, social sciences, and the reification of these and implementation of these in a system where they can be effective in new ways, that can be tested in certain ways. So Noah also asked that we use images, and I'm not going to, and this is why. There were none on Google Images for me. Sorry. I want to mention these two systems that are also in the domain of the two systems of mind that I'll discuss that are involved with literary generation. And these are good examples of systems that operationalize, in the case of Griot, conceptual blending and figuration. And Fox is going to talk, I know, about something, one of the systems, Living Liberia Fabric, that's based on Griot. And then Mexica by Rafael Perez y Perez is a system that uses a model of the writing process, the engagement reflection cycle, to generate plots, to generate stories. And so this is a little bit of the broader field. The system I'm going to talk about specifically first is Curveship. It's a system that I've created that's a full-featured interactive fiction system, or at least from my standpoint, it's full-featured. It doesn't do multimedia effects. It could be easier to deploy it and play games in a browser and so on, but it has all the basic capabilities of an IF system. And it also incorporates a 3-stage pipeline text generation system. And so it's capable of providing varying text, and it does so based on these concepts in Gérard Genet's in Figure-toi, in narrative discourse, where he describes 5 broad categories. And so in each of these categories of possible ways that the telling of a story can vary, there's an implementation in my system to show how that can be done automatically. And Curveship has been integrated with an existing plot generator, Mexica. And so this preliminary implementation we did, actually the system was called, this is a few years ago, and the system was called In, which allowed us to have an integrated system called Mexican. This is a system that uses the plot generation ability of Mexica and then is able to tell that in different ways. Of course, it's not perhaps a very authentic model of the way that people think of things, because they probably don't formulate everything about the plot and then decide how it is they're going to tell the story that results. There might be some relationship that's not a pipeline there. But one has to start somewhere. So, and Curveship is available at curveship.com. It's free software. It's in Python. So the idea behind it, as I want to say, is to combine some of the great things about interactive fiction represented by Adventure from 1976 with the literary possibilities of narrative variation, and here represented by Raymond Queneau's Exercises in Style from 1947, and then reap the benefits that result from that. So the system has lots of circles and a few cylinders and things like this. It has modules that carry out all the basic functions of an IF system. And the thing that's new about it, really, and highlighted in yellow, is the ability to tell the same underlying state of the world in different ways. So the simulation, which actually doesn't have anything to do with the specifics of language, it controls what rooms are adjacent to one another, whether a door is open or closed, what objects characters are holding, and things like this. Right? That's entirely separate from how it is that that world is represented in text, how it's told. And the teller is the part of the system that has that 3-stage pipeline generation in it. So I'll give a demo of this. This is actually a particular piece in Curveship called Adventure in Style, which is also quite literally a combination between adventure and exercises in style. And I can go walk around, go east, go into this building. Oops. pick up objects, do the normal things that one does in interactive fiction. This is a full implementation of the game adventure here. But it has something different, which is that when I actually pick up the lamp and turn on the lamp, some things change. So notice it says, you pick the lamp up to report what happened before this turn. And now it says, I turned the lamp on for some reason. And if we look at the lamp, we see there's actually a dial, and the word memoir appears there. It's a setting. So this is a diegetic device. You don't have to have a lamp in your story. You don't have to make things happen this way, but you can choose to have something that lets you have these different settings. And having done that, one can do everything in the game, walk around and see the new type of narrative variation. So in this case, what we've done is we've changed the story to not have a narratee. There's no you. Instead, there's a narrator, which is a player character, and we've also shifted the position of the narrator in time so that, as is conventional in a lot of fiction, the telling happens after the events. Of course, that's not the typical way that interactive fiction works. It's normally you are standing at the end of a road. What's that? At which level? So, well, the past tense is what's happening grammatically, but the way that Curveship works is that you specify actually features of the narrative. So where the narrator is in relationship to events. You can even put the narrator at a specific point in time. The narrator will tell things up to that point in the past tense, what's going on there at the present tense, and other things in the future tense. So these are different possibilities for how to narrate. Some of them based directly, many of them based directly on Raymond Queneau's exercises in style, where he picks things like this. So let's see. So for instance, we can move the position of the narrator back in time, and then we get, this is actually the way that waiters talk, right? The first course will be a lobster bisque.
How did it go back to you and the future?
Oh, I turned the dial to 5 here. So.
That's perfectly transparent.
So we could. Let's see here. This is another one that is based on one of the sections in Raymond Queneau's exercises in style, in which we just narrate everything twice.
Is there something you could type to give the key to what the 9 options are?
No. But you can, the source code is visible, and you can turn the dial to.
And what kind of operationalization is this, Nick?
This is an operation. This is an operationalization of Gerard Genet's narratology. It's actually looking at, which is of course designed for analysis originally, not for generating things, but we can use it for all sorts of fun.
But I'm trying to understand, seriously, I think we're all trying to understand the experience of the person who's using this. I don't know if they're the storyteller, or I'm not sure what.
This is created as a demo, so I'm trying to show you the possibilities that this has. I'm not showing you this is aesthetic beauty or a poetic richness that you should yourself.
Why would I turn the dial to 8? Why would I turn the dial to 5?
Well, you don't have to. I can do it for you up here. I mean, I'm demonstrating the different possibilities as, as we might have a procedurally animated character hopping around doing different things, and Ken might show us, the different, right? And so, I mean, part of the, but let's continue this riot for a little bit. At a higher level, what I'm doing in creating a system like this is to see what of Genet's ideas about narrative are susceptible to a computational implementation. What can I put into a system like this? What his ideas about voice, mood, his ideas about frequency, speed, order, what things can I simulate and what things are harder to simulate.
So, you're probably going to at some point show an example of where it breaks.
Gosh, that's almost too easy for me to.
I think what's coming across, I mean, it took a lot of work
Yeah.
to do this and still have all the English be proper with all the funny little things. It'd be great to see
Yes.
something like, to show how hard it is by, he dropped the pin while he was juggling it, that moment
Yeah.
that it fails somewhere.
Okay, so I mean, the situation, there's the ways in which you might see breakdown is you might find that just that this model doesn't match what you want to do from a simulated and narrative sort of perspective. Okay, and there's some overhead involved in, I'm basically creating templates that these are generated from. So whereas when I normally write interactive fiction, I just write a sentence that I want it to emit. But I have to do more in this case. I have to write these templates, and that's a more error-prone situation. I can make mistakes. And those are the types of error situations, I think, that are most telling that come up. But it's not as hard as, there's a lot of general language generation with conceptual dependency system, with elaborate sorts of representations for syntax that are much more difficult than this. So it's trying to find a balance between that full power and something else. All right, since I'm doing so well,
No, this is
Let me,
the kind of conversation I was hoping for, actually.
let me move on to talk about something that seems to be completely transparent, just like Brenda was asking for. All right. Okay, so here's a different system, and it says a girl sets off through the park. A wolf whistle sounds. The two circle. Laughter booms. The man dashes, leaving pretense behind. Pigeons scatter. The girl runs. The park screen is gray. I'll read one more of these. A muscular man paces the girl. A snatch of song reminds the girl of her grandmother. The man and girl exchange a knowing glance. The two circle. The man's breathing quickens. Pigeons scatter. The man's there first. Pairs of people relax after journeys and work. The girl puts on a slutty dress. The girl sets off through the park. The girl turns to smile and wink. A snatch of song reminds the girl of her grandmother. The man's breathing quickens. Things are forgotten in carelessness. The girl's bag lies open. A patrol car's siren chirps. And this is a system that is very concise, as you'll see in a moment, and I think fairly simple and easy to understand. Evidently unlike the last one that I showed. It's something, though, that implements a real narrative technique, in this case, ellipsis, leaving things out, which Michael Young is also someone who's created a system that models ellipsis in a much more sophisticated way. This is really degree 0 of ellipsis, what it does. It produces stories that, I believe, suggest different interpretations and have different emotional resonance. But it's a very limited scope, limited enough scope that it can be reworked, translated, and built upon. And that's it. It's just a list of sentences, and they're kept in order, and then all but 8 of them are removed. So this is, of course, I've written these sentences specifically for this case. I didn't just find an existing text that did this, right? So I was writing things which would suggest, one way or another, and depending upon the context in which they appeared, different things about what was going on, whether the girl and man know each other, and how old she is, and whether this is a happy encounter or there's something sinister related to it. And it's something that is based on ideas that, Jeanette is one of the people who talks about ellipsis, but also Henry Fielding in Tom Jones, the idea that you leave things out to give the reader an opportunity of employing that wonderful sagacity of which he is master by filling up these vacant spaces of time with his own conjectures, right? So this is a technique that is used in production of literature and is important to the analysis of literature. And at least, some people found that the system that I created, although it's extremely simple, could be categorized as a story generator and as something that actually produced stories of different emotional resonance. And it's also been a system that has been translated to Russian. I don't think it's been widely remixed or reworked. There was a version that I did with Beth Cartier that is a text of hers. But of course, it's only 3 lines of code in Python, so there's not much of a reason that people would reuse the code. They could just write it themselves.
So what, again, tell us again, what's the purpose of this? I mean, why, what are you illustrating?
So the purpose of this system is to take a real, we can create also, there's all sorts of ways to generate literary texts of different sorts, poetic texts, imaginative texts, right? And so some ways we can do that are just combinatorial, and those can be interesting, and I like doing that too. But you could also take an existing literary technique that's known and that's understood, such as this technique of ellipsis, leaving things out, and say my system is going to work based on ellipsis, and what's the simplest way I can make a system to do that? Well, I could just have it leave things out at random. I'll keep 8 of the statements, and I'll...
Why would you do ellipsis that way? That's what I don't understand.
Well, because every other way is harder. It's more complex. And so if there's something that you can learn from doing the simplest model, that takes you a few hours or a day to implement, then give that a try. You can also build up, I mean, this isn't the only level at which...
So what do you learn from this? I have to ask, that begs the question, what you just said, right? So what do you learn from doing it the simple way?
Well, I learned that it produces different emotional valences, that it is possible to create something that reads as different sorts of stories, characters who are of different sorts, different sorts of events that are transpiring in different ways, even if one doesn't have a weighting or some type of complex model for how to remove different things and how to choose what to tell and what not to tell.
So do you see this as a potential tool for a writer to actually, he's got ideas and he wants to play with them, and then he looks at them and he edits from that, or? Yeah,
well, I think in the same way that writers, for instance, learn things from reading books. They learn about different literary techniques. You could look at a system like this, and you could learn that leaving things out is a powerful narrative technique, and that choosing what things to include and what things to omit, even in this very, very simplistic case, right, can make for different stories. But I see this as a literary work itself, that it can be translated to Russian, like literary works can be translated to other languages. Yeah, yeah. So
But did you find that in running this and having these in random groups of subsets of 4 to 8, that there were just outright failures? Like, oh, well, that's about it. It's just, they don't match up.
Well, so specifically, for instance, one of the reasons that this let me switch back to English, but just to make things, if I can, which I seem to not be able to do. Here we go. One of the things about it is you don't want to include very cohesive text. You don't want to include an aphoron reference. So if you have pronouns that refer back to something in the previous sentence, and then you omit that sentence, right? It makes no sense. So there's something that at the low linguistic level, right, is connecting to that.
So you knew not to have pronouns here because it
Right.
just would fall apart quickly.
Another way to ask the question is how much do you have to iterate this text in order to make it work?
Right, yes.
Like,
Yeah.
How much work did it take to author?
Well, that's right, because, I mean, that question is, what I'm doing is I'm trying to incorporate these things which, in a more sophisticated system, I would model and I would represent, I would build, which is why I think it's a good first step for doing something like that. So let me move on and to describe these projects, right? Part of what I've been doing is trying to promote the idea of like creating very small and simple systems as a good way of doing inquiry. And this is not what you get if you're trying to do a PhD dissertation, you need a large project. This is not the way computer science, right, tends to work. But so Curveship was a 3-year project through the park I did in one day. It's also about 1/300th the size of the furiously refactored and refined code that I have in Curveship, and yet based on how much I discuss and present about this, it seems to be about a tenth as interesting, right? So actually maybe it seems like a pretty good idea to make very small, simple systems like this. And of course you can also build on them, but I mean, just to note that like it's quite reasonable to make these small, simple projects. And I actually have a technical report from my lab, the Trope Tank, which describes this difference of scale and my advocacy for these extra small sorts of systems. All right. So why would we keep doing a project of this sort? I mean, not only in the generation of literary texts, but in interactive fiction systems, but in other sorts of settings. Right? Why would we do this? Well, I think implementing humanistic theories in a computer system really always test those theories in certain ways. I mean, actually, narrative theory is reasonably formal among the whole world of the humanities, and yet when you're putting it into a computer system, it demands that certain things be nailed down, certain things be specified. One of the insights I propose from the system is that what Jeanette calls distance, narrative distance, can actually be built up, composed out of other different narrative aspects that Jeanette discusses. That it's not independent of those, which is what he tends to suggest in the book. The other thing is that creative production can actually test your implementations and ideas. So this makes particular sense if you're talking about narrative, dramatic, poetic, some type of literary production. Then of course, to make it work, you need to do that sort of work to produce something creative. And then also, it's operationalized theories are able to open up these new artistic possibilities. And this is, to some extent, the other side of the coin, right? It's basically it's like the idea, does my interactive drama is going to prove some good things about my AI theories. Oh, my new AI systems are going to open up new possibilities for interactive drama, right? So you can imagine this type of conversation going furiously back and forth, like in Michael Matthias's Corpus Callosum, for instance. And these theories also engage with computation because you may have to derive some new techniques in order to actually implement some of the things which we haven't touched on in existing computational work. All right. So if you need any ideas of what to operationalize.
Yeah. So, Nick, this question is about the scholarship of operationalization, I guess. So, Jeanette, as I'm sure you know, is not alone at all in his lack of, he stops short of the data structure level, right? And that's I think maybe Marie-Laure Ryan is the only person I can think of that, from a computer scientist perspective in narratology, is actually precise enough for an implementation. Yeah. And I think what you do to go from the analytic model that Jeanette has to a program is narratological scholarship and filling in the details in the implementations. You have to make decisions that Jeanette left out. But so given that that's not at all unique in narrative theory, for instance, is it taking, why isn't, is that a good thing for narrative scholarship? Or because it's not typically done?
Yeah, I think it is. And it's not in the mainstream of what people are doing in narrative theory because they're doing analysis, right? Narrative theory Jeanette's narrative discourse is taught in creative writing courses. So it's not that it's only used in that case, right? But that's the mainstream of discussion for that. And some of the things, it's not that I wouldn't, Jeanette nods, Jeanette is sloppy, Jeanette, but I would say, he did something. He came up with some ideas that are good enough for the analysis of literature in certain cases, but you can't just turn that around and generate text out of it.
Do you think that people who work just on the generation side, like AI people who come to interactive narrative, should be held to an analytic standard as well? So what you're doing in some ways is taking the analytic work and trying to hold it to a generative standard. Yeah. And could you reverse that and say that those AI guys, they should produce representations that we could then go and compare to other analytic approaches?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, the thing is that's an additional challenge, I think, to bridge between people working in narrative theory to generate theories for. Not to say that it's impossible to bring those discourses across, but it's an additional challenge to say, how would a model developed in a generative, interactive system context for computing, how would that inform narrative approaches? I think those have a lot to say to one another, but there's challenges in making that connection.
Okay, we'll do one more question, then we'll switch speakers.
All right, I have, it's sort of more a comment than a question, but I wanted to defend Nick's choice to build the particular miniature he chose, applying so much ire, and this is, or not ire, but interest. And this is partly based on the conversation we had in the bar together before you did that project.
That explains it, though.
But when you go to conferences like iKids, International Conference on Interactive Digital Storytelling, there's an interesting split we tend to see there between AI people who are building these like deep models of some kind of narrative phenomenon, but the output of their system is not actually aesthetically engaging or functioning as like an aesthetic whole or an aesthetic work. And then you have this other half of the people there who are basically doing non-algorithmic interactive storytelling. A lot of and sort of a lot of pre-hemp, but it actually functions aesthetically, right? And so there's this kind of depressing split between algorithmic work, deeply algorithmic work that never actually results in anything that's aesthetically compelling, and deeply non-algorithmic work that is aesthetically compelling. And I think these miniatures are one way to kind of creep up on that problem from below, right? Because it sort of forces it's forcing you to engage deeply kind of aesthetic and poetic choices and algorithmic choices in their most minimal form. And then the other thing, from that conversation in the bar, I remember we talked about, like in the Shankian tradition, there's the famous book, 5 Programs Plus Miniatures, where it was sort of like taking 5 PhD dissertations worth of Yale School AI work and then writing down like the minimal boiled down list program that's like the essence of it. And we sort of discussed like, well, why couldn't you do 5 miniatures plus program, right? Where you first start with the minimally boiled down thing, learn from that, but the minimally boiled down thing forces you to maintain it keeps your feet to the fire about actually doing something aesthetically interesting, and then sort of creep up on it from below. And so that's why I think these kind of experiments are really interesting as an